Welcome, everyone, to the Advanced Sports Analytics Podcast. It's Wednesday, April 21st. I'm here with Stuart Gibson. We are going over the main slate on SuperDraft NBA. Stuart, how's it going?
Going all right. Going to be shaping up to be a busy evening when you factor in really the early slate has a ton of injury stuff to be aware of, both in Indiana and Philly. For the purposes of the show, though, I think probably would be in the best interest of time to avoid talking too much about those because we could really get carried away hypothesizing about what will happen in Philly. I'm excited kind of just in the interest of time to be focusing on the 7-game main slate on SuperDraft that kicks off at 8.
All right, so I like to sort of jump in straight away with some of our early findings. We like some Utah guys tonight. We like low multiplier Jokic at center. The complete locks we have on the night are Clarkson and Paul George. We typically are not super high on Porzingis in SuperDraft. He tends to be lowish multiplier, but tonight we have him in 82% of optimals. Towns, we have in 76% of optimals. Jokic, 57% of optimals. Then other players that we have 30% or more. Conley, Anthony Edwards, Fox, Holmes, Randall, and Trae Young. So guard is fairly open. And I don't think news is going to move us around that much at guard. Let's see. Do any of the Miami guys come into play if Butler were to happen to sit?
I guess if maybe Butler and or Adebayo sit and Hero plays, I could see that being significant. If all three of those questionable guys, Adebayo, Butler, and Hero, are ruled out, I have to imagine that some Miami players will really ascend in value. Could see that being Nunn or Dragic, or Nunn would probably be the two high risers at the guard position if the news were to shake out that way. The late game, Fox is questionable. If he were to be ruled out, could see that being a potential boost for Tyrese Halliburton. Those are kind of the key injury notes that I think we're going to want to keep an eye on for the late slate as a whole, and they do seem to have more implications for the guard position. So
and Wall being a late add to the injury report, typically it kind of turns into a 50-50 scenario. So how do you see that changing if Wall were to sit? Houston to be competitive in general there. But.
Yeah, I'm seeing him as probable right now, so I have to assume that he will play. I'm working on the assumption that he will play. I think Kevin Porter plays up if Wall's out. What is his multiplier tonight? They've been pretty aggressive on him. Yeah, he's at 135, so it's not even so low of a multiplier that I think Porter would be a total smash. I think honestly it might have more implications on the Utah side. If Wall doesn't play, this game is in really serious blowout risk territory, and Utah is one of the most aggressive teams in the league in benching their starters and removing them from non-competitive games. So I could see that Wall being out to have an adverse impact on, say, Conley, Joe Ingles, Bogdanovich, potentially a boosted scenario for a guy like Jordan Clarkson. I'm not sure that it would really show through in projections in a notable way, but one way in which kind of you could build lineups that deviate from mean projection systems is building lineups under the assumption that games play out a specific way. And I do think there is a likely scenario in which, Houston gets blown out by Utah and Utah turns to Jordan Clarkson for like the entire fourth quarter. And, he takes a lot of shots when on the floor. It's just kind of a question of getting him minutes. And, I expect those minutes for him to be up with Mitchell out. When Mitchell doesn't play, Clarkson can get over 30 minutes. If Wall doesn't play, I do think there's kind of an extra half minute to full minute projection for Clarkson. And, from like a mean projection standpoint, and then from a, understanding what the tail outcomes are, like I think there is a tail outcome where like Clarkson plays like 34 minutes or so if Utah can blow him out quick.
So let's talk about some guys that aren't hitting our optimizer that we think might be in play for tournaments, sort of high multiplier guys with pop. At let's say 1-6 and above, who's in your conversation? Is Barton in your conversation?
As I scroll through here, well, they're just below 1-6, but like if Fox were to be out, either of these Sacramento guys at 1-5, Heald or Barnes could be in play. I've been trying to kind of chase Nurkic and get Nurkic correct. He has not played, I think, in the last maybe 2 games, has it been? He's a guy that, when fully healthy and playing his full role is, I think, way better and way more productive than his 1.65 multiplier. It's just that he hasn't shown kind of, not he, but Portland hasn't shown a willingness to kind of give him his full role. But I do feel like he's one of these guys that, can play minutes in the high 20s, but less than 30, put up like a 15-15 game and break the slate. So he's a guy that I would want to take have some tournament exposure to. It is a tough matchup going up against Denver, so there's kind of a caveat there. Barton, yeah, we do like Barton a decent bit as a 1-6 plus play. We have him currently projected for 35 minutes, so he's got a good role. 20% usage, not exceptional or anything, but if he's able to hit kind of a usage spike night, could be a decent spot for him. As I scroll through some more, I don't know, trying to take advantage of the Kawhi Leonard injury with, say, Jackson or Zubac, who are both 1-6, I think could be a decent idea. Memphis typically plays pretty up-tempo, and not the greatest defense. So I think that would be maybe a spot to try to take some shots at. Those would be kind of the guys that I'm looking at in that 1-6 plus range. But in general, I would say our projections, which typically do gravitate towards some of the mid to higher multiplier plays, tonight appear to be more settled on the mid to low multiplier plays. So yeah, something to keep in mind.
So by our projections, forward is maybe slightly stronger than guard. And guard it's somewhat up in the air, right? Like we're currently having Clarkson hitting a lot of optimals, but he's by no means a lock button play, even at 1.65. We have him as a lock button in the optimizer, but would you play him in every lineup tonight? I don't think I would. Especially
but that, I mean, to me, that's not at least for my style of play, it's less of a function of projection for Clarkson and more just that I don't really like lock buttoning any player. I usually turn, the bounce up to like 5 or 10%, which, a player, if you have any non-zero bounce, you're not going to get 100% exposure to any player. Yeah, I don't think he's a lock button play. Like, there are routes to failure for him, being that Houston keeps it closer than anticipated, and maybe that shaves some minutes off for him. Maybe Clarkson just has a highly inefficient game. Potentially, he could just not have as high of usage as we're expecting. Maybe he plays more minutes alongside guys like Conley or Bogdanovich or Ingles, who maybe take usage away from him. But I don't know. I mean, to me, he feels pretty strong. I think he's, at least per our projections, in a bit of a tier of his own from a guard for guards. The discussion gets pretty murky pretty much for all guards after Clarkson. There's kind of this tier below him: Edwards, Conley, Fox, Trae Young, Luka, where there is a little less separation. So I don't know. I think it's for me in our projections, it seems to be clear that Clarkson is kind of the guy. But then there are, I think, harder decisions to make for kind of who to fill out guards 2 through 3.
Yeah, tonight is the type of high volatility night that usually we're making arguments against the low multiplier guys, but Doncic could be very much in play for a top 3 guard spot tonight. We have him in 10% of optimals, but I think he's a good tournament play. We like Anthony Edwards a lot. He's in 47% of optimals. He's at a 1.3 multiplier. We like Trae Young a good bit and 30% of optimals. He's at a relatively low multiplier of 1.2. Slow paced matchup in New York. He seems like we have him in 30% of optimals, and he's probably around 30% to get in a top 3 position. Fox, 47% of optimals.
So Fox is an interesting kind of, just an interesting player in that, he has been, had quite favorable projections for a while now and been stuck at kind of the 1.3 multiplier. If that were his price tonight, I think, and he's been kind of near lock for the past couple of weeks. His multiplier now is down to 1.1x, which I think is really if Fox were at 1.3, I mean, you would just start with Fox and Conley and then just kind of make, have one tough decision to make a guard. But because he is priced so aggressively at 1.1, he is kind of just centering, or rather projecting post multiplier around some of these other guys that are, have higher multipliers than him. I think it makes for kind of a more difficult decision point, which I think is ultimately good for a kind of tournament contest. It's gonna diversify, I think, ownership a little bit more than previous nights where like Fox has been up at 70-80% ownership.
Yeah, this seems like one of the more wide open tournament slates that I've seen, despite being a medium-sized slate. So we mentioned it's an interesting night where some of the guys that are showing up at 5 to 10% frequency in our optimizer are by their nature good tournament plays just because they're high variance. So guys like Michael Porter Jr., he has a lot of variance in outcomes. He's a good tournament play. DeRozan, he's only in 5% of optimals, but a good tournament play. DeJounte Murray, Buddy Hield, CJ McCollum. So those are guys that just by their nature have a lot of volatility and are good tournament plays. Okay, so going to forward, we have one lock button play, 100% of optimizers, Paul George. George, in Kawhi's absence, will be hard to get away from tonight. He's a 1.25 multiplier, very high multiplier. So it's a tough fade tonight, right? Like when you say that he's, I mean, he's got to be like 70% to be in the top 3 tonight. 70.
Yeah, he does feel like a tough fade, and I don't know. It's LAC's been odd. Like whenever they have these guys like George or Leonard out, it does feel like you have to lock in the guy that's in, but then sometimes they're not like locks to smash. I mean, I'm trying to think like around the league, there are some injury dynamics where like when player X is out, I mean, it's just with such high consistency, the secondary player kind of Robin, has a big game. Like I feel like Dame and CJ are kind of like that in Portland, where if like Dame is out, like CJ just with such high consistency smashes and rarely misses. I'm trying to think of like other teams that have that dynamic, and the Clippers would figure to be that way, right? Like George and Leonard do so much of the same, do so many of the same things offensively that when one is out, like it would just seem like such a natural kind of direct correlation with the other one succeeding. But I don't know. I have there have been games in the past, and we've had a lot of decent sample with this where one player being out doesn't necessarily guarantee that the other player smashes. But nonetheless, I mean, it does feel like a very difficult to fade spot. Not saying it's totally out of the question to do so, but yeah, pretty great spot for George from a projection standpoint.
So I'll give my summary of the forward position. I think that we are often making the argument for high multiplier guys that are getting good opportunity based on news flow. But tonight, I think it's a relatively condensed conversation around some lower multiplier guys. I think the conversation is essentially a 6-way conversation between Doncic, Towns, Randall, George, Porzingis, and Michael Porter. Our optimizer ranks those George as the lock button play, then Porzingis, then Randall, then Porter, then Doncic. And then you've got some tournament flyers that have a small probability of getting there that you might play in 1 or 2 lineups, like an RJ Barrett or Aaron Gordon. But it's a relatively condensed conversation, I think. And so I would recommend playing George in 75, 80% of lineups, and then having 2 of Doncic, Towns, Randall, Porzingis, Porter. And I think there's a pretty good chance that your top 3 forwards are drawn from that list of six players. Do you see it roughly that way?
Yeah, I think I'm aligned with you on those plays. To me, the guy that I really like is Towns. He's got the lowest multiplier of that group, but it's just such a good matchup going up. Like Sacramento and Minnesota are similar teams in that they both play super fast. They both are terrible defenses. I think Malik Beasley being out stands to benefit guys like Towns and Anthony Edwards a decent bit. So I don't know. To me, Towns is kind of the my preferred forward out of that non-Paul George group. Randall is compelling. His minutes have been insane. I think he's topped like 40 minutes in maybe 3 straight games. So it's been interesting to see how Thibodeau has managed some of these, pretty much Randall and Barrett. Like there's been points at the season where he's topped 40 minutes in 4 straight games, rather. One of those games was an OT game in which he played 47 minutes. Yeah, 1.2. I mean, getting a guy who's going to play 40 minutes feels like a pretty strong play. High floor, and I think that extra 0.2 is gives him, I think, a nice ceiling as well. So I like Randall and Towns kind of as my two preferred guys within that group.
And our listeners know that we favor playing in general one low multiplier guy per tournament team. And then if you're playing one guy, we like to run it back, especially on a smaller, medium-sized slate, because you do get the benefit of having an especially competitive game or an especially fast-paced game or an overtime situation. So Towns is a good one that you might pair with Fox or Buddy Hyde, and then with Trae Young, you could pair Randall. And then just keep in mind that for Dallas, when you're dealing with two relatively low multiplier guys, we don't like to have them in the same tournament lineup. So doing either or on Doncic and Porzingis. And that one, just to be clear on that one, you in your tournament lineups might just tend towards the more competitive situation, since we do have some fast-paced games. Just tend towards those competitive situations like Minnesota and Sacramento, Portland and Denver, and in Dallas with the 10.5 point favorite. Just make sure that you don't make the big mistake, which would be to play Doncic and Porzingis in the same lineup there.
Yeah, and the other kind of pair that to me is, if you're using our optimizer and not setting rules, I wouldn't be surprised if you get a decent bit of Cat plus Edwards. That to me would be a pair to try to avoid, and Capella plus Trae Young, I think, would also be a pair of players to consider avoiding. Although of those three kind of star duos, the Capella plus Young is maybe the most palatable, just given that Capella can still have a big game through blocks and rebounds, which would figure to not be super negatively correlated with Trae Young.
Clarkson would be a bad pairing as well.
What's that? Which one?
Conley Clarkson.
Yeah, I think so. That being said, like, their multiplier is high enough. Both of them have reasonably high multipliers that there are ways for them to maybe exist in the same lineup and potentially not have like a superb ceiling, but also not have such a low combined floor such that, your lineups could be sunk by the combination of them. But in general, yeah, the two player profiles of those two guys would figure to be kind of anti-correlative, which is not desirable for tournaments.
Okay, at the center position, with forward being so strong, there is a decent argument for playing Towns in your center position and then playing the rest forward. We've mentioned Porzingis, Towns, Jokic, Randall, all as being great center plays, and Towns, Randall, and Porzingis are all forward and center eligible. So I would say that those four guys, they have a pretty good chance at having the top scoring center position. We like Towns the most there, so I would probably rank them for myself. I would probably rank them Towns first, then Jokic, then Randall, then Porzingis. Randall and Porzingis very close. So would you take Towns first there?
Yeah, I think so. We have Porzingis actually projected the highest. Porzingis is interesting. I mean, he has a high ceiling on SuperDraft given his ability to block shots, shoot threes, and good double equity, which gives him, I think, a pretty high ceiling. So from a mean projection standpoint, he will, I think, play up compared to like a median oriented projection system. So like, I don't know, I might make the case that for cash game purposes, Porzingis probably has a higher mean maybe than some of these guys, which is desirable for tournaments, but his median outcome, I think, is probably lower than all three of Kat, Jokic, and Randall, all of whom I think have very high medians. Kat may be the one guy who has a equally high kind of mean as his median.
So we often like high multiplier center guys just because when you're getting 3 points per block and 3 points per steal, you can get some great tournament plays at these high multipliers. They can pop off every once in a while. But tonight is a night where it's kind of thin for the high multiplier guys. The only one that's really showing up is Nurkic at 1.65. Do you see anyone else at 1.3 or above? I mean, Porzingis is 1.3. Anyone else higher than 1.3?
Yeah, not really, aside from, like you mentioned. I mean, in Nurkic, I feel like Nurkic is kind of in similar territory as like Zubac. There's a pretty Zubac I would include in kind of the Nurkic tier of high upside, and then if you move way down from those guys, there's like Pirtle, who they've priced down, Cantor, who they've priced down, and who hasn't been playing a ton when Nurkic plays. If Nurkic were to be ruled out unexpectedly, which at the present he's fully expected to play, I could see Cantor. He's put up some tournament winning nights before. One guy that's kind of like lost in the middle between the low multiplier, high floor, very secure players, and then these high multiplier, kind of high volatility, high upside guys, and kind of stuck there in the middle. And I would expect him to not get a ton of ownership is Clint Capella with the injury situation in Atlanta. Danilo is out. He's been serving kind of as the backup center for Atlanta. He's not expected to play. So I could see Capella getting an extra minute or so. I kind of like Capella. I think he has some nice upside and is likely to go overlooked given the strength of a number of centers, but a lot of them are forward eligible centers. So like a lineup that maybe doesn't include Paul George, you could get all of Porzingis, Kat, and Randall, and still have play all of those guys at forward and have an open center spot. But yeah, I think just given how strong these pretty much three forward centers project and how favorably Jokic projects, and he always carries good ownership, I could see Capella going a bit underowned. And while he does project a little below these guys, I would expect that the ownership gap will be larger than the gap in probability that he is the top center, I guess, if you kind of wipe out the three forwards that are on top of him, the three kind of forward center flexes.
I like that play. All right, well, that will do it for tonight. We will be back on Friday. Stuart, thank you very much. I will see you on Friday.
Yeah. Thanks, and good luck everyone tonight.